In Unit 2, we will be learning about our essential question: what can we learn when we face problems? In this read aloud, we will talk about some challenges that people deal with every day. We will talk about facing a challenge and how that facing a challenge can help a person or a character. And we'll also be talking about challenges that characters and stories might look forward to. In this read aloud, we will be looking at drawing inferences. When I draw an inference, I'm making a decision about something that's happening in the story or a character based on what the author is telling me. I might look at pictures in the story. I might read details that the author gives me in the story. All of those details help me to make a decision about what's happening or what's going to happen in a story. I can also call making an inference reading between the lines. In other words, the author might not come out and tell me a certain thing, but I can make that decision based on the clues that he gives me. So I would be reading between the lines to figure out what is happening. Let's practice that as we look at this story today. Today I'm going to read aloud a story about a girl named Koyoko. Koyoko wants her grandmother to tell her favorite story. I want you to listen to the story that her grandmother tells. Before I start reading, I want you to think about Koyoko's favorite story. Can you think about what that story might be? Use some details that you found on the page to help make that decision. Very good. Because I see the title of my story is Cinderella, I'm guessing that the favorite story of Koyoko is probably Cinderella. Remember that we said when we draw inferences, we're making a decision about what we read as we read, listening to the clues that the author gives us. Because it says the title is Cinderella, I'm making an inference that that is Koyoko's favorite story. Let's go ahead and listen as I read aloud the story. Cinderella by Sabrina Adams. Grandma, tell me the Cinderella story again, pleaded Koyoko, pulling the bed covers up to her chin. That's my favorite story. As I read the beginning of this story, I read that Koyoko pulls the covers up and asks for a story. This helps me to infer that it's nighttime. The author doesn't tell me that it's nighttime, but I use the details from the story. It says that Koyoko pulled the covers up to her chin and asked for a story. That helps me to understand the setting of the story. It's nighttime and she's getting ready for bed. When I read a story, I can make an inference about what's happening by using those clues. So this helps me to infer that it's nighttime and Koyoko is getting ready to sleep. All right, said Grandma, kicking off her shoes at the side of the bed. Cinderella was a kind and beautiful young woman who lived with her wicked stepmother and two wicked stepsisters. They made her clean and cook while they did nothing, added Koyoko. That's right, replied Grandma. It's sad that they were mean to her, but I have to ask, what happened next? Said Koyoko. Well, the wicked stepmother returned home one day with an invitation to a grand ball that was being thrown by the royal family that ruled over all the kingdom. She wanted her daughters to join her at the ball, but she didn't have to invite Cinderella, continued Koyoko. No way, said Grandma. Cinderella also didn't have a beautiful gown to wear like her stepsisters had. But something magical happened, said Koyoko excitedly. That's right, said Grandma. On the night of the ball, Cinderella was sad. She went outside into the garden to get ready to try to forget about everything, and there she sat on a bench near a pumpkin patch by an old tree, and she watched some small animals scurrying around. Then, suddenly, the tree transformed into a fairy, said Koyoko. The fairy told Cinderella that because of her kindness, she would be able to attend the ball. The fairy then waved her wand, and a stunningly beautiful dress replaced the ragged dress that Cinderella had been wearing. Delicate golden slippers covered Cinderella's bare feet. The fairy magically changed a pumpkin into an elegant stagecoach, and the garden animals into shining horses to pull the coach. I love that part, said Koyoko. Cinderella thanked the fairy, said Grandmother, and the fairy gave her just one warning. She had to be back home by midnight because that's when all the magic would end. So Cinderella took off in the coach right away and got to the ball as soon as she could. No one recognized her when she saw her enter the ballroom, not even the wicked stepsisters and the villainous stepmother. I heard the word ballroom in that paragraph. The word ballroom is a compound word. It's made up of two or more separate words, ball and room. The word ballroom contains those two words put together to make one word. That's a compound word. In this case, a ball is a fancy party. I can use my understanding of these two words to determine that ballroom is a room where a fancy party takes place. As I look back at this story, remember the author didn't tell me exactly what a ballroom is, but I can use the clues that I'm reading to make that decision. Again, I'm making an inference. I'm using what the author is telling me to help me understand what's happening in the story. Let's continue reading. What happened next? Cinderella caught the prince's eye, and they danced and talked all night long until just before midnight. That's when she had to go, said Koyoko. She nearly forgot because she was having so much fun. So she said goodbye and ran out the door and out of sight just before her gown turned to rags. But in all the excitement, Cinderella lost one of the golden slippers while running down the castle stairs. But the prince found it, said Koyoko. Yes, and he promised to search the entire kingdom until he found Cinderella. So he searched and searched for the woman who had the slipper. When he got to Cinderella's home, the stepsisters tried on the slipper. It didn't fit either of them, said Koyoko. Nope, not even close. The prince was about to leave when he spotted Cinderella mopping in the kitchen. Then what? Said Koyoko. He recognized her, even wearing the rags and mopping the floor. He asked her to try on the slipper, and the sisters laughed because they refused to believe that she could have even been at the ball too. But the slipper fit, said Koyoko. He recognized her even wearing the rags and mopping the floor. Well, of course it fit. The princess asked Cinderella to marry him, and after they got married, they lived at the castle, and they were nice to all the people who worked there. Now everybody in the kingdom loves to tell the story of how the prince met Cinderella. Thanks, Grandma, said Koyoko. You retell that story so well. Good night. I want you to think about how Koyoko feels about this story, Cinderella. Let's think about how we would know that this is her favorite story. First of all, it doesn't tell us why she likes this story, but I can use some of the clues that it's telling me from the story to make that decision. The first thing that I notice is that while Grandma is telling the story, Kyoko is answering before Grandma can even finish telling the story. Did you notice that? Kyoko's kind of telling the story too, isn't she? When Grandma tells about the invitation, Kyoko jumps in and says, "But she didn't invite Cinderella." "No way," said Grandma. So as I'm reading this, I notice Kyoko knows the story very well because she's telling it just as Grandma is telling it too. That helps me to know that Kyoko is very familiar with the story, so it must be her favorite. Another thing that helps me to understand the character of Kyoko is over here where it talks about them being mean to Cinderella. When she says that they made her clean and cook while they did nothing, Kyoko says, "It's sad that they were mean to her." If Kyoko thinks it's sad that they were mean to her, that gives me a clue about Kyoko's character. And it helps me to understand maybe why she likes the story of Cinderella. Because Cinderella overcomes evil in the end. And Kyoko likes to see good overcome evil. Again, the author didn't tell me that in the story. I used the clues to make an inference. I'm using what the author's telling me to make a decision about the character, what she likes, and how she feels about the story. I'm using the clues that are in the story to help me understand that. I also can tell how she feels about her grandma. At the very end, she thanks her grandma for telling her the story, and she says, "You retell the story so well. Good night." So that tells me that Kyoko was very pleased with the story, and she appreciates her grandmother, and she's kind to her grandmother. I can recount details from the Cinderella story. For example, I can think about the events that happened and the order that they happened. Those are the key details in the Cinderella story. First, Cinderella lived with her wicked stepmother and wicked stepsisters. Next, a fairy helped Cinderella go to the ball. After that, Cinderella lost a slipper at the ball, and the prince used it to try to find her. In the end, Cinderella and the prince found each other again, and they were married and happy. Those are the details in order that happened in the Cinderella story. I can also recount the details that happened with Kyoko and her grandmother as they began